Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Montpelier Happy Hour here on WVEW 107.7 LP Brattleboro, your community radio station. I'm your host, Olga Peters, and this is the show where we talk about how everything in Montpelier shakes out for the rest of us. And today I'm speaking with regular contributor Emily Kornheiser from Brattleboro. Hey, Emily.
Hello, Olga.
And her fellow representative from Newfane, Emily Long, who is also the majority leader in the House. Welcome, Emily.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. Hello to both of you.
So glad you can be here too. And we are, as we know, this next week is election day. Big doings, but we're kind of in like a little holding pattern until election day. But we wanted to check in with you, Emily Long, since you are the majority leader, to just kind of take a pulse and start with, you know, as the majority leader, as you're looking to the new session, what are some of the things on your horizon that you're kind of putting on the to-do list and preparing for?
So first of all, I just want to acknowledge that I'm not in a holding pattern like you, because there's a lot of work to be done between now and the election, which is 5 days away. So we're working very hard to make sure that we provide all the supports that our candidates need to be elected as they're running, and they're knocking doors furiously right now and making tons of phone calls. And I have a lot of people reporting to me that they're doing honkin' waves. So there's a lot of activity going on and we're all super busy. What I am really looking forward to, and I'm getting more and more excited about this as the days pass, and that is to be able to work with this amazing group of people who are running this time. I cannot tell you, I know I've said this before from previous elections that, wow, this is a really strong group of candidates, but I'm not the only one who's recognizing it this time, clearly. And we have an amazing group of very talented people running, and very excited to get to work with them.
So Emily, Emily Long, thank you for talking about the work heading up to the election, because I think a lot of folks in Vermont tend to think candidate first, party second. So we don't tend to talk about like party activities or party platforms or this kind of cohesive things that happen kind of along party lines, for lack of a better term. So I'd love it if you would just highlight a little bit more, like, as the Democratic Party, how are you supporting candidates?
So I bet it's very similar to the way every party is supporting their candidates, which is to make sure that they are speaking to their values, which are our strong democratic values. Everybody needs to. There's a lot of challenges out there on the campaign trail for a lot of folks, especially new candidates, and it can be very intimidating to be a new candidate. And so I want to. My job is to make sure that everybody knows the best practices of campaigning, and again, it's a lot less about party than it is about what your values are, and engaging very closely with our voters and in all Vermonters. And so what I really encourage everyone to do is make that person-to-person contact. It's not about sending out mailers, although they play a huge role now that we have mail-in voting. So that's one piece of it. But honestly, what we need to be doing as candidates is engaging in conversations with Vermonters, with voters all across the board, to try to hear what their issues are and see what we can do, where their challenges are and what we can do to help them. So that's our job.
It's funny, Emily, I remember when I first was thinking about running for office, how intimidating the idea of sort of like getting to a door and persuading voters or selling myself felt like. And then when I realized on maybe the second door that it was really about like listening deeply, sharing of myself. And if I did that and I won, I knew that like I knew what my voters wanted of me and they knew who they were getting. And if I lost, it meant that I wasn't the right candidate for that particular, that for my community. And I
For
think it's
that moment in time.
yeah, or for that time. And so I think it's a really incredible, a really powerful message that I think you send as majority leader to the candidates that are running around the state that, talk from your values first, get to know your community better. That's because I don't think it helps. I mean, of course, that's how you win elections. That's like, that human contact. But I think more than that, it's what will make folks more powerful, skilled, capable, solid legislators when they get to the building.
Absolutely, Emily. Well said.
And for either of you, Emily Kornheiser or Emily Long, as you've been talking to either fellow candidates or voters, potential voters, what are you hearing from folks right now?
Hey, before we get to that, can I actually just like do a little bit of like sort of logistics for listeners who might
Sure.
not know this stuff? So we have 150 seats, right, in the House. You're the majority leader for the House. How many of those 150 seats have Democrats running in them
We have 123 candidates running.
Okay. Cool.
On Tuesday. That's the most we've had in the last two elections. I believe we had 121 in both of the last two elections. So we have 123 this time.
And so
oh, sorry, go ahead, Emily.
And then we have sort of a specific campaign team within the House Democratic Caucus that supports those candidates, recruits those candidates, like has all of those values-based conversations for that work.
Right. We have layers of teams, frankly. And, our different teams are, the leadership team, which is made up of the majority leader and the assistant majority leaders. There's also seasoned members who have run many times before, and they provide supports where needed, especially in certain regions. If there's a chair who's a member from Chittenden County, they can speak to the issues of Chittenden County a heck of a lot more than they can for the Northeast Kingdom. So, we try to make sure that all candidates have contact with folks who can really help them as they're going round door to door and meeting with their voters. So, and then we do have a campaign team as well. So.
And of that 123 that you mentioned who are running, any idea of how many of them are incumbents and how many of them may be newbies?
That's a great question. I can't throw a number out at you right now because to me, every single one of them are candidates. And for me, there's some who are incumbents that don't need a lot of extra help and others who are brand new members who actually don't need a lot of extra help either. So I've never really actually counted. Isn't that funny? I don't know. Maybe Emily, you have.
No, I haven't, but I don't even really have a strong sense of what the ratio is. Yeah.
No, but I've got to just say about this. We have been asked over the years about our demographic makeup of our caucus and our membership in the House, the 150 members. And when someone asked me or someone a little while ago, how many women do you have? I don't count them. How many women do you have in the House? I don't know the answer to that question off the top of my head. And so I am making a concentrated effort to reach out to our caucus, and maybe even the speaker down the road will reach out to our members to share their own demographics, and so that we can know that, because sometimes it's not easy to know, and we would love to have that answer. We're trying very hard to have a more diverse membership of folks in the House so that we represent the diverse state of Vermont, both in age and gender and all sorts of things.
And as the caucus or as the leadership team, have you had a chance to institute any initiatives or programs or support systems to support people who might be either new to the process or maybe they're not used to seeing themselves in elected government, and so they may need extra support as well?
We actually do have a House campaign director who does provide supports, technical supports. There's a lot of technical needs for folks. You know, it's hard to put together a mailer that you want to send out to your voters without having some background if you don't have that tech skill. So we do have somebody who can help us with that, with things like that. But mostly this work is more about one-on-one because everybody has their own specific needs. And it really varies region to region. Rural parts of Vermont have very different needs than I don't link someone from South Burlington to somebody in the Northeast Kingdom to help them learn how to knock doors like Emily was talking about, because I have members that can walk their whole district by foot, and I have other members who can't walk at all to any, except maybe one or two neighbors. They have to get in their car and drive from house to house. So it's really quite different, candidate to candidate, region to region. So, we just try to meet the needs of everybody, 121 of them one by one, 123 of them one by one.
But I think we all do both sort of like sometimes with formal connections and sometimes with more informal connections, find ways of both providing and seeking support that are, I certainly found myself in both campaign seasons after my own election and during the legislative session, like definitely connecting with women who happen to still have kids at home, who had sort of questions. And I don't know, we're considered like very young women in the legislature, but certainly we've talked a lot about how I would be middle-aged in a normal state. But I think, those kinds of connections and that kind of sort of informal mentoring of, like, what do you do? I remember Tristan, when I first was elected, I found out that Tristan Tolino, who still had kids at home, would cook all the meals for his whole family on the weekend before he would leave for the week. And for like a few months, for like maybe the first month, I tried to do that. And then one day I was like, I don't have to do that just because Tristan does that. And so sometimes, like, if you get too much information too early, you kind of start to think like, this is how I need to do this. And so it's a funny, tricky little balance to make.
It's very true. And just to be fair, Tristan's a chef, so it makes it slightly easier for him, I think, than maybe any one of us, because I wouldn't be able to do that either. But again, that sort of takes me back to what I said. I think it really is tailored to individual needs. In my role, I spend pretty much every day navigating or supporting members who have specific issues and challenges that they're addressing, or just answering questions. Here's one way members do it, that kind of thing. So we really do try to link people with folks who can help them out. And we're always available on the leadership team. We tell everybody, call us anytime. And they do, mostly.
Now, we often hear terms thrown around, especially around election season and right after election season, about majority, supermajority, that type of thing. Now, right now, the Democrats do hold a majority of seats in the House. We'll see what happens with elections. But step us through what that means to have a majority or a supermajority, or and what that might mean for policy.
I think that's a great question, because this is sort of a personal issue for me. We have 92 members in the House, so we do have a majority in the House, which is why I'm, as a Democrat, the majority leader. We had 95 in the last biennium, and we're looking to increase our majority in this biennium. People throw that term around a lot about supermajority, and it's linked very often to the Democrats holding a supermajority. And Emily knows very well, just like I do, that 92 is not a supermajority. A supermajority is 100 seats, holding 100 seats. And that means that if you have a supermajority, you are able to override a veto if you can get every member of that supermajority to vote the same way. And that's obviously not the way it works, because even within our very supportive and values-based family of Democrats, we all have our own different views, and we live in different parts of the state, and we have different perspectives of things. And so our job is to make sure, my job as majority leader, the job of the team, the leadership team, and the job of us as a family of caucus is to make sure that we are doing the best job we can to meet the variety of needs and issues out there for Vermonters. And the more we can do that, the better chance we have of passing legislation easily and smoothly. And we do that quite frequently. That's the vast majority of the bills we pass. We have controversial bills sometimes that we need a stronger majority to be able to pass. I'll just say the term supermajority is a bit frustrating to me sometimes because a lot of people ask me, you're out there working to try to gain a supermajority so you can override vetoes. Well, that's not my perspective of it. I believe that increasing our majority is important for us so that we can bring the administration to the table, so that we can have conversations just like Vermonters expect us to have conversations across the aisle and amongst the different branches of government, so that we can develop legislation that we can all support. So the work needs to be done prior to the vote. And I deeply believe in that. And if we can increase our majority, and if we can become what folks call a supermajority, we have a much better chance of everybody coming to the table, I think. And so that's the work that I'm trying to do, is to make sure that we can grow our majority so that we can bring folks to the table and have those deep conversations we need to have ahead of time to make sure legislation, when it comes to a vote, is supported.
Thank you, Emily Long. And for context, I believe, Emily Kornheiser, I've heard you raise this concern in the last session that sometimes the administration didn't come to the table. And is that a correct
I mean, the most classic example would be the pension conversation, where the governor at the beginning said basically, like, this is the legislature's problem to solve. I am not going to engage with it. Did not engage with it. It passed. We did some really, really hard work with lots of partners, lots of difficult conversations, came to an agreement with the Senate, passed with an overwhelming vote, and then the governor vetoed it. It was such an outrageous exercise of the veto power that we actually had a unanimous override, but that's a whole, that's like sort of I will acknowledge it as sort of an extreme example of the situation, but it happens very regularly that the governor will not participate in the policymaking process, which is incredibly hard, not just because of the threat of a veto, which is hard. And it's sort of insulting for something to be vetoed when the problems were not acknowledged earlier on, when they could still be fixed. But also because, as we've talked about so many times, structurally, the legislature has so little staff, and the administration's job is to administer the law. So when the administration, meaning the folks who are going to administer the law, don't come to the table to help develop the law, when they sort of say they're hands off and won't offer up data or the kind of staff that would be on the ground implementing the work for testimony, it makes it just much harder to actually engage in just like the basic lawmaking process, not even the political parts of the lawmaking process. So I appreciate, Emily, your perspective on the idea that, as we have more members and we have a stronger majority, that maybe the administration would be more likely to come to the table and really engage, because it would be, I've certainly worked with sort of folks in the administration who were willing to collaborate as long as no one found out, and it made it even that makes it so much easier to get the work done. So yeah, that would be incredible.
Yeah. I mean, I also think, Emily, it's what Vermonters expect of us. Yeah. They expect us to work together, and they expect us to compromise where we need to compromise, adjust legislation where it needs to be adjusted, just like Emily was just describing so well. And then, we're not going to always agree on everything. I mean, veto is there for a reason, and I get that. And I think it can be used in an appropriate way. I just don't think that that's the way it's been. And Emily just described all the reasons why. And I think we can do better. And a stronger majority probably will force that conversation, that work and that compromise.
And in the committee process, almost always we do the work that way. And probably I'm sort of surprised at how often, Democrats in Brattleboro will ask me about like working across the aisle and what that looks like, just because I don't think that's a reputation that Brattleboro has statewide. But it's probably like one of the top 3 questions I get. And folks are really heartened when I tell them about like some of the really powerful collaborations I've had with some Republicans in the building. Not all Republicans, the same way not all Democrats, not all none of this is a monolith, but it's been pretty incredible. I also, Emily, I wonder how much you've thought about this. The idea that if we had a stronger majority, that each of our own members would have a little bit more freedom, or a little bit more, I guess the word I'd use is opportunity, to like really focus on whatever sort of specific flexibilities they would need, or to like, if the tent was big, like if the tent had more people in it, I wonder if people would feel sort of freer to be in the big tent.
You mean with difficult policy choices, or
with difficult policy
votes?
choices? If like, if everything didn't ride on just that single vote from that, if people didn't feel like things were so dependent on their single vote, if members would act differently. I'm not sure. I really am not sure. I don't have a theory on it.
I'm not sure about that either, Emily. I think it's an interesting perspective, but I just continue to remember working so closely with everybody, and not just our caucus either. A lot of my work is not with my own caucus, but it is with the minorities. And that part of this is so important, because Emily, you mentioned this about Windham County asking you those questions. Well, there aren't, I don't think currently we have any Republicans in Windham County. We have a few independents, but we don't have Republicans down here. So people don't get to see close hand in our local, gatherings, us working across party lines. But the fact is that once you walk into that building and once you're sitting in committee, the party falls away for the most part. It comes back a little bit more on the floor, because floor is where the show happens, right? So, but the work, the hard work we do really is as legislators, as members of the House. And going back to your question, I think it might change some perspectives, but I also know that every single one of us as 150 members of the House all have our specific views of things. And regardless of how many members are in our caucus or not, I think people are going to have to, they will continue to make decisions based on what they deeply believe, their deep held values, because everybody is an individual up there. But there's also a recognition, understanding, if we're going to get work done for Vermonters, if we're going to advance legislation that's going to help the state of Vermont and the folks who live in it, we have to work together, and we have to come to a place where we may not get everything we want, but it's the right steps to take. And so
yes, totally. And that's what compromising is. That's what people are looking for. That is the only, I don't think very many people stay thinking that they're the one with all of the answers up in Montpelier, right? Like, it's not, even if I could come up with brilliant theories to solve all of Vermont's problems, I don't, I'm under no illusions that would be what would become law. And so even though I have very firmly held beliefs about the right way to do many things, I'm still willing to compromise on a lot of things. And I guess I'm just sort of, I don't know, engaging in a thought exercise about what would happen if sort of less of that compromise or more of that compromise was needed, and if I would change my own way of being in that work. My guess is I wouldn't.
My guess is you wouldn't, and my guess is most wouldn't, because I really don't think we go into this work thinking about the number of votes we're going to have on the floor. I mean, that's my job. That's the whip's job. We need to know that. But for members, we're just trying to do the hard work, to get things across the finish line, in whatever manner we do it.
And if there's nothing, I mean, I think the difference between governing and politics is the perfect being, that the perfect can't be the enemy of the good when you're governing, though it often is in politics.
It's a very good summary, Emily. We're just coming to the end of this first segment. And so before we hear from some of our underwriters, Emily Long and Emily Kornheiser, we did some redistricting earlier this year. And I excuse my ignorance. I don't remember if those districts went into place for this election. Yes, they did. Did that
Olga,
how did that play?
I think Olga froze for a second, but I think her question is, how is that going to change how does that change the electoral political landscape? I, for instance, do not have a street that I was very attached to in my district anymore, and I'm feeling sort of sad about it. But I think that is the least of the redistricting changes that have happened around the state. So
yeah, and there was redistricting all over the state.
Yes,
some areas were a lot bigger than others. In Windham County, we've had some changes because we actually lost a little bit of our population, but the changes haven't been hugely significant here. But there are a few who've had some changes. The northwest part of Vermont has grown, and with the northwest part of Vermont growing, it shifts some of the population there. So I believe South Burlington have 4 members, and they have 5 coming now. That kind of thing. So don't hold me to the numbers, but I think that was what it was. There was also a push to consider more single member districts. There was some significant push early on in the process to do, all single member districts. But as we all know, once you try to go single member districts, you're chopping towns in half all over the place. And that didn't feel right. But there are a few more single member districts than there were before.
Right.
And so some of the districts have been made smaller and, taken apart and separated into 2 separate districts.
And so that means that some folks are campaigning, longtime legislators are campaigning in districts that probably know them because they're neighboring towns, but they might not have campaigned before. It means that some folks get to campaign with sort of half the constituents that they have before, which creates a lot of more opportunities to making sure that they actually speak to every single voter.
That's right.
And then there's only one race in the whole state that is 2 incumbents who are facing each other.
Hey, guess what?
What?
Did you hear that beep?
I did.
I forgot to turn off my timer. Well, thank you for that. As my clock is telling me, we need to hear from some of our underwriters. So stay tuned. The Montpelier Happy Hour on WVEW 107.7 LP Brattleboro will return in a moment. Welcome back to the second half of the Montpelier Happy Hour here on WVEW 107.7 LP Brattleboro, your community radio station. You can also find us on BCTV and many PEG stations around the state, and we thank BCTV for making that possible. You can also find us wherever you find your podcasts, as well as our Facebook page, and you can always drop us an email at the montpelierhappyhour@gmail.com. Hey, Emily. What do we remind folks of at this point in time?
Well, as it turns out, the views and opinions expressed here on the Montpelier Happy Hour are those of the host and the guests, respectively, and not the station, nor their employers, friends, family, countrymen.
Or pets.
I had a countryman instead of pets this time.
So for those who are just joining us, I am speaking with Representative Emily Long and Representative Emily Kornheiser. For those who don't know Emily Long, she is also the majority leader in the House for the Democrats, and she is based in Newfane. So thank you for joining us, Emily. And let's a little bit, elections are next week. So many people may have already voted by mail, but some folks will be going to the ballots, to the polls. As both of you are out and about talking to either fellow candidates or to the voters, What are you hearing as far as lessons learned, concerns, policy, anything like that?
I just want to add a framing thing. We always talk, like, I feel like whenever one of these interviews happens here on the Happy Hour, on VPR, wherever it is, the talking point is always like talking to voters. I don't think there's a single candidate who just talks to voters. You talk to 17-year-olds, you talk to like people who walk down the street. No one's like, are you a voter or not? And I'm going to listen to you or not. You just like talk to the people in your neighborhood and find out what's working for them. So I just want to like do that little verbal reset on the universe and hope it sticks.
Can I also add one little piece to that?
Yeah.
That it often is a lot more, Emily's absolutely right. I totally agree with what she's saying, but I would also add that it has a lot less to do with talking to, but much more to do with listening to. And I know our candidates who are knocking doors and meeting that 17-year-old in the street are really listening hard to what people's issues are. And that leads us to what your question was. And the first thing I'm going to say is probably the number one thing we're hearing. I don't, Emily might have a different perspective, but the feedback I'm hearing from our candidates, probably the number one issue remains maybe a toss up between housing and child care. Climate gets pretty big. Emily, I don't know what you think.
Housing. Child care, climate, and then reproductive rights. And what I think gets also sort of, and then in a slightly longer conversation, because I think there's a difference between asking someone what's an issue of concern to you and a conversation with someone about like what's working or not working in your life and what are some possible solutions for it. So sorry for anyone who's watching us on the TV for my lighting today. And so I think in deeper dives, it's often a conversation about sort of a much wider swath of social supports beyond childcare. It's really about like how government can work or not work, what affordability means or doesn't mean. It's that kind of stuff. But I think when someone's just sort of listing issues, it's childcare, it's housing, it's the combination of housing and childcare, and reproductive rights, and then people like being really scared about democracy. I mean, I think that question that I get about the Republicans and like the way things work in the State House is really a question that's sort of the beginning of a conversation about, I'm really scared about democracy and divisiveness, and like what can we do about it here in Vermont, where we might have an opportunity to do more.
Just for clarity, Emily Kornheiser, when you said that question about Republicans in the State House, parse that out a little bit.
Yeah, so I often have folks ask me, what is the State House like? Do you work with Republicans? Is it possible to work across the aisle still here? Are you seeing the same kind of divisiveness in Vermont that you see in other places? And so I think that's really a much bigger question about, is our democracy going to survive? What are we going to do here in Vermont to really uphold it? We've done incredible work on voting rights. We already had some of the strongest access to the polls of any state, and what we've done over the last few years really just is pretty exemplary in terms of people's ability to vote and to access democracy. And I think we're working every day as individual candidates and as individual members on civility, and making sure that we have the strongest democratic institutions that we can. But I think people are really scared about that.
They are scared of it. They really are. And we hear that at doors, and a lot of people feel like that can't happen in Vermont, but the fact is that it not only can, it does, and it has, and it's shifted. The national challenges may not be at the same level in Vermont as they are in other states, but they impact here too, national and global, I will say. Those things really do appear here in Vermont as well. And so that does make people feel very uncomfortable. And we hear about that quite a lot. Is our democracy really being challenged? And in many ways, I think it is. And that's why it's so important that we are out there engaging with voters in the best way we can, one-on-one, to make sure that we're telling them we're here to listen to what you're saying. That's what democracy is, so that we can try to find a path forward. But it's different nowadays. There's no question.
You know, what's resonating for me right now is I was listening to the radio earlier today, and I just caught this snippet of an interview. They're interviewing a woman, and I didn't hear where in the country she was from, but they were asking about access to the polls for her, and voting rights and that type of thing. And she was saying that she personally had not had any issue getting to the polls. However, she says, I have a lot of privilege. And this is the part that stuck with me. She says, I have a car, so I can drive to I can get to the polling station. I have a job that allows me to take time off from work. And I have enough free time in my life to be able to sit down and kind of look at the candidates and that type of thing. And it just, what's resonating with me right now and kind of about democracy is something Emily Kornheiser touched on earlier about people's lives and what kind of supports they have and what kind of free time it allows them to have for their democracy and for their community. And so I'm just throwing that out there because it kind of stuck with me, and what you are saying now, Emily Long, just kind of brought that snippet of the interview that I heard earlier today back.
Yeah, and I'll just say that's the main reason all those things that woman you heard speaking on the radio and her privilege, why vote by mail is so important for so many people. They don't have that privilege, and that's true here in Vermont as well. Folks are really busy, and we hear about those challenges that they encounter every single day just trying to get through the day. And so making voting easier is critical. And our voting system is incredibly secure. And for the folks who question me about our voting system, when you start talking about how the vote happens locally in your community and the process that you go through with your town clerks and your boards of civil authority who oversee elections like this, when people start to remember that, they start to remember, oh yeah, that's my town clerk, she's my neighbor, or he's my friend, or whatever, and they go, oh yeah, it is a local thing, and it is secure, and it is safe, and it's been proven that, and so folks are feeling pretty comfortable. I will say that I hear more, maybe Emily, you hear it too, I have more constituents tell me they're concerned about the mail. And so I've had quite a number of people say to me, I'm dropping mine off at the town clerk's office, or I'm going to that ballot box to put it in because I'm not quite sure it won't get lost in the mail. So I'm not sure whether that's accurate or not, but I know there's a little bit of fear about that.
Agreed. And for folks who are listening to this now and election day hasn't happened yet, it is at this point when this airs on Friday, it is time to drop off your ballot or go to the polls on election day. You can do either, but you shouldn't be mailing in your ballot at this point. And also putting in a plug that your state legislature does not control the U.S. Postal Service. It is entirely a federal issue. And so agreed that there are a lot of challenges going on right now with the U.S. Postal Service, and I encourage you to reach out to one of your 3 Congress people, to one of your federal representatives to work on that for you, as I do myself. Another thing, while we're on sort of election security and that whole thing, and can democracy be under threat here in Vermont? I've also, lately had a lot of, since Nancy Pelosi, Speaker Pelosi's husband was assaulted in his home, I've gotten a lot more questions from constituents asking me about my own safety, which is not a question I really had very much from constituents before. And we're really surprised to hear that, and this is actually the person I talked to about it today, her partner worked for a domestic violence agency for her entire career. So this is a woman who knows that communities are not safe, right? She spends a lot of time talking about violence in her own home. And yet still, she was really surprised to hear that, I think most legislators get weird, sometimes scary email and phone calls. And some of us have like higher security threats and lower security threats. And none of it is at the scale of what, Speaker Pelosi or what happened in Washington, but it is real here. And there are white supremacist cells in Vermont. We are not immune to that kind of thing. And so I just, I don't want to scare anyone. I feel fine in my bed at night, but just like bad things happen here too. And we have to work with our neighbors and work with each other and hold each other up to make sure that things don't get worse.
And in my role, I spend quite a bit of time reminding members that if you receive mail or an email, or you get a phone call, or you encounter a situation that makes you uncomfortable, please don't hesitate to reach out to leadership, to, if you're in Montpelier or not, even in Montpelier, the Capitol Police, because it is really important that if you're not feeling safe, regardless of whether you are or you are not safe in that situation, if you're not feeling safe, you need to speak to someone. And so I have to say that quite often when someone will say to me, I got this really strange email and I don't, and then I say, well, are you feeling uncomfortable about it? And they say, yeah, I am. And so, well, good, because you need to speak to someone about that then, because even if it's nothing, I think in this day and age, you just don't take anything for granted. And it's a part of the job that I don't think existed as much in the past. It's a little more, it's a little more on people's minds today.
Yeah. Yep. Well, and access is different perhaps than it was, especially before video conferencing and everything.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
So I know that, a lot of things are not in place yet because the elections haven't happened around policy or committees or that type of thing. But I'd love it just as for folks who may not know the process. Once the election happens, Emily Long, what's kind of on your to-do list as far as, okay, we know who's been elected and now we need to prepare for the session. So walk us through what happens then.
I'm so excited to hear the answer.
Yeah, take notes, well, Emily.
I just need to tell you that my goal is to make sure that every single person who is a candidate has a little time off to breathe. And then my second, and I'm already doing this with candidates, and we'll be doing this with members after they won't be sworn in until we go in January, but the members elect who will be known to us after the 8th. I always tell them this single thing, and Emily's heard me say this before, but families first. Your family comes first. I get questions all the time. I've got this problem with, a family issue or whatever issue. I will say families first. You've got to make sure that you are taking care of yourself and your family, because you're no good to anybody as a legislator unless you are feeling comfortable and supported and secure. So a lot of my job is make sure people are supported. So any of those things that come out they'll come out immediately after the election. Often they come out before, about how am I going to navigate my own personal challenge that I have. Many of the questions are, I've been thinking about and I've talked to my employer about how I'm going to move from, in January to being in Montpelier 4 days a week, but then I've got this other challenge. So there's always things that come up and a lot of questions to be asked. My job is to also make sure that I'm making sure folks know the calendar, and the calendar, there's an all-member briefing that's coming up that we'll all be sitting in December. We have a Democratic caucus that we do an all-day caucus that we do every single December. It's always the first Saturday in December that we will get together for the first time as a family of caucus members and start to talk about what we did here out there on the campaign trail, the things that are really important to Vermonters, and start building that, having those conversations and building what our priorities are going to be for the next session and even for the biennium. And so those are some of the key pieces that have to be addressed. I'll just say, even just housing, it's
Hmm.
a big deal when people don't always want to think about what their housing is going to be prior to being elected because they don't want to assume that they're going to win their election. But it becomes a very big deal when they win their election. Where am I going to stay if I live too far away to commute?
Right.
Those are some of the nuts and bolts.
And then one other sort of prep nuts and bolts that's less of a caucus nuts and bolts and more of a whatever is that as pretty much as soon after the election, community invitations start
Oh.
pouring in.
Yeah.
And so
Ah.
our Windham County caucus, which Emily and I are both in addition to being, Democratic caucus, goes to a series of meetings. Historically, we would do it just, whoever invited us, we would go to their meeting. In the last few years, we've worked to consolidate the meetings into a few days and invite people to come to us more often. We started doing that during the pandemic just to make Zoom a little bit easier for everyone. But we're going to maybe try to do that more this year. So there's dozens and dozens and dozens of community meetings where community organizations sort of update us on the issues that they're hoping can get solved this biennium or to just give us some more context. Some of that happens through the politic process. Like some organizations really like to engage with candidates, but more often community organizations like to wait until after the election and really just focus on policy.
And I just want, because I'm familiar with with other parts of the state too, maybe a little more than some other members are, but Windham County actually has a very strong and connected delegation. And we do organize in the way that Emily just described so that we can meet as a delegation with our organizations that want to chat with us prior and during the legislative sessions. And so we do that. It's not as the same for everybody, but I always tell our members, and I'm already starting to talk to candidates who are pretty sure they're running unopposed or whatever. How do I navigate these competing interests? I have so many meetings being offered in any one day, and I always tell them, you know your district better than anyone else. You know your organizations better than anyone else. Make sure that you're talking to those organizations, and sometimes you're going to have to tell them I can't make it to that meeting because there's another one. And so we do a pretty good job in Windham County of trying to have an organized calendar so we can meet with as many of them as possible. It's hard.
Yeah. And because Emily probably can't say this as majority leader, I'll say it. Now you can just rip out what you're going to say, Emily. So, I knew my first time after I ran, I was sort of scheduled to keep on working basically until January 1st at my paid job in order to get ready and then go to the legislature. In addition to not building in sort of rest time.
Yeah.
I also didn't build in for the fact that pretty much starting on December 1st, all of this prep work starts happening. So there's all the community meetings, there's all the caucus meetings, there's meetings with attorneys for drafting legislation, there's sort of pre-meetings with committees, there's
new member orientation.
There's new member orientation. And with the exception of new member orientation, we're not paid for any of that. And we're missing our opportunity to be engaged in our paid jobs. And it's just another one of the uncompensated parts of the job that I'm happy to have and I would not give up for anything and I love so much, but is structurally so difficult for people to access because of these really unseen aspects of the work that I am working right now to have more seen. So, just want to put in the plug for that.
It is absolutely true. And I can say that as majority leader because I hear about it all the time from our members, and again, this isn't a Democratic issue. This is across the board issue for us as legislators.
And actually, one thing I was just reflecting on how many younger Republicans left this last round being really, really clear, often mid-session, being really, really clear that they just sort of hadn't realized how much work it was and they couldn't afford to keep on doing it. And so they left. It was like a whole slew of the younger Republicans all did that.
Yeah, very true.
Well, and I think we've talked on this show too about one of the downsides of the legislatures because there is so much uncompensated work or uncompensated time it does dictate who can and cannot run quite often.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of loops back to our conversation about diversity and representing all of Vermont.
And I'll just say, Olga, the thing that I sit on the rules committee, and we have this, we're engaging in this conversation right now about how we operate as a legislature.
Mm-hmm.
And we're comparing ourselves to all other states, getting some support from the National State Legislator Conference group, helping us to sort of get the data that we need so we can take a look. And I will say one of the things that people forget about when a Vermonter decides that they're going to run for the legislature and they become a elected official, Emily described about that time when you work up until January 1st and then you leave your job, you take your leave or however you work it out with your employer, you are typically taking a cut in pay.
Right.
For many people are taking cut in pay. And after a few years of doing that, it really can impact your retirement. It can impact your Social Security benefits. It can impact your retirement. If you happen to be a parent who has decided to stay home with your child prior to that, that impacts your retirement. So you accumulate those years of where you're getting a lot less compensation, and it has a lifelong effect. So when Emily describes people who make the decision, I had no idea how this would impact me. Those are folks who are actually looking long-term ahead of them and saying, I can't afford to do this. I can't afford to lose my retirement that I would be getting if I were working my full-time job right. So it's a challenge.
So we talk a lot in Vermont about citizen legislatures. And this conversation about compensation and retirement and everything brings this up for me. Is that something that is like a legal term, or like, would we stop being a citizen legislature if we compensated our lawmakers better? Like, do you see what I'm asking? Is because I'm kind of wondering, like, what are we holding on to? What are we afraid to let go of if we made changes where lawmakers were compensated differently?
So there's all kinds of different levels of compensation. And that's what we're finding out, that some states, bigger states typically, but some of them are close to us, pay, $70,000, $80,000 a year. And, there's a difference between full-time legislature and part-time legislature. The vast majority of legislators are part-time legislators. Sometimes it's something just as simple as, okay, you folks, we're not going to pay you any more salary, but we're going to offer you healthcare benefits, that sort of thing. So there's all different ways. Some legislatures, some states provide some compensation for off-session work. In Vermont, we only get paid when we are in session or out of session when we're doing official legislative duty that we have been appointed to by the legislature to do. So,
and just for scale, for people to understand that, I probably spent around 20 hours a week all summer and fall on legislative related work, and I have 6 days that I was compensated for the entire off session.
Yeah, and I'll just say for me, I very rarely get on committees, summer study committees or things like that, because of being the majority leader. I don't really normally get appointed to those things. I am on rules, so if I have to go up to rules committee meetings in Montpelier, I will be compensated for that one meeting, that day, that meeting. But that's the only time I ever get any compensation for the work I do either. So we're not doing this because of compensation. That's obvious, but how much of a barrier is this for people who really would want to do it, but just can't figure out how to make it work for them? And that's a problem.
Yeah. So we are almost out of time. I just want to check in with both of you. With elections being next week, anything you want to add or want listeners to consider as we get ready for November 8th?
Please go vote.
Exercise.
And please Bring a friend to vote, or a neighbor to vote, or a stranger to vote. Make a hot date to vote. Whatever it is, just go
Whatever
vote.
works.
Mm-hmm.
Exercise your democratic right to vote. That is the message we need to be sending out now. We are doing that over and over.
Well, thank you very much, Representative Emily Long. If folks want to learn more about you or contact you, how can they do that?
They can email me through my legislative email, elong@leg.state.vt.us.
Thank you. And Emily Kornheiser, how about you?
Folks can go to my website, emilykornheiser.org, and get links to all the different social medias and my email and my phone number and all that stuff.
Thank you. And as always, the Montpelier Happy Hour on WVEW 107.7 LP Brattleboro, your community radio station, airs every Friday on the radio as well as wherever you find your podcasts. So have a great weekend, everyone.